Hello wonderful person, this is Philip, and in this video I want to share my thoughts on the question, what don't they tell you about Buddhism? Michael Hills specifically requested that I answer this question, so here's what I want to talk about, because there are a few things that I have found are generally not very well understood when someone first makes contact with Buddhism. One thing that bothers a lot of people when they eventually find out is that even though the Buddha 2600 years ago made some very clear and quite strict rules for his monks, lots of monks nowadays don't follow those rules exactly. Now, some monks openly talk about this, but lots of monks don't really talk about it, and as you have more and more contact with them, you tend to discover, oh wow, this monk eats in the afternoon, even though monks are not supposed to eat in the afternoon, and lots of little things like that. Now, supposed to is a very strong word, and Buddhists generally, especially ones that have developed the practice, have developed their practice to a certain point, don't think in terms of, ooh, what am I supposed to do? And they certainly don't think in terms of, oh, this monk is supposed to do something or not supposed to do something, because it's not really your business to evaluate whether the monk is supposed to or not supposed to do what he's doing. Now, if someone asks you for advice, of course you're welcome to give your opinion, and you should give your honest opinion. But if the monk is not asking your opinion on what he's doing, then I wouldn't worry about what the monk is doing. The other thing I should mention here also is that there are different Buddhist traditions, and if you are brought up or if you become a monk within a certain tradition where, for example, it is completely normal for monks to eat in the afternoon, then it would be too harsh to even say, oh, monks are not supposed to eat in the afternoon, because that's just how those monks have done it for many years, so that is their tradition, and I think we can respect that. It's not like the world is going to end or they're not going to make good progress just because they eat meals in the afternoon. So this adherence to rules by the monks is one thing that I think surprises lots of people in the first few months when they actually start practicing Buddhism and spending more time around monks. But generally it's not that big a deal because people understand. As a matter of fact, oftentimes here in America I've found that people want the monks to be a little bit more like them because they consider the monks' rules very strict and sort of inhumane. In this society where you're supposed to eat 4 big meals a day and snack in between, if the monk tells you he eats only 1 or 1.5 meals a day and doesn't eat anything after noon ever, you think to yourself, oh, this must be a horrible life. Even though once you get used to it, this is really not a big deal. But this is really just a superficial aspect of it all. I believe there is one other thing that they don't tell you about Buddhism, simply because it is kind of hard to talk about it, especially in today's terms, because our world, our culture is just at a different point. It's a totally different culture from where the Buddha taught, the culture in which the Buddha taught. So even what the Buddha said back then is going to sound kind of strange and different nowadays, but add to that the fact that the Buddha always knew very good words for any particular person to explain his truth. Now, we are usually not that skilled. We have to sort of try to find a wording that will work without really knowing where the other person is coming from. So, with all that, there is one term that is often misunderstood, and that is partly because people don't like to talk about it because they know it's difficult to talk about, and partly because people don't understand it really, but they still like to talk about it. Partly because we're just not very good at explaining things. It's one thing to sort of understand it for yourself, but it's a whole nother story to try to explain this to someone who hasn't practiced meditation for months, read a few hundred discourses of the Buddha, etc. And this one particular term that I'm talking about is Nirvana or nibbāna, depending on which exact language you want to use here. Now, it starts with the fact that most people don't realize what the literal meaning of that term would be, and if they have a literal translation, which would probably be extinction, it doesn't sound very good. Extinction sounds like, oh, what? You try to extinguish the human race? You're trying to end everything? What is this? So that's why that term is rarely used. And then there are people who look at certain quotes that the Buddha used to talk to certain people to explain what that nirvana really is. And oftentimes he would talk about how through mental cultivation you can get into higher and higher realms of heaven, so to speak. You can just have a more and more refined experience as a result of your mental cultivation. And then in the end, he usually says, but if you cultivate your mind really, really well, then you'll reach nibbāna or nirvana. So that leads lots of people to believe, or at least to talk about it in such a way that they think of nirvana as the highest heaven, just the most refined and most beautiful heaven realm. And this is not quite correct. The actual meaning of nirvana is the cessation of suffering that leads to total liberation and permanent happiness. That's sort of what it's really about. So when most people think of a really beautiful heaven, they think of sense pleasures, of really good food, or maybe it's a really pleasant climate there. Maybe you have lots of virgins there. There are religions that promise you virgins in heaven, because apparently men like virgins sometimes. So there are all kinds of ideas of what must be really pleasant, and that's how people tend to see heaven. But that is not what the entire Buddhist path is about, and that's not what the goal of the Buddhist path, which is nirvana, is about. Nirvana is really sort of the opposite. Now, a good way to explain this, I think, is substance addiction, because in this world we have a lot of that, and lots of people have at least second-hand experience with substance addiction. If you imagine that you're addicted to, say, alcohol. If you're a really heavy alcoholic, you need a drink every few hours, otherwise you start shaking and you get really sick and everything is just horrible and you think you're going to die, and maybe you do die if you just cold turkey stop drinking alcohol altogether, because you're addicted. Now, the incorrect understanding of heaven would be that there is always alcohol available, that heaven is just a place where alcohol runs in the streets, you have taps everywhere, and you can access alcohol whenever you want. But that is not really what the optimal situation would look like. And if you have been addicted to alcohol, or if you know someone who has been addicted, then you probably know that a much better solution would be to understand that alcohol is not useful, that it's actually hurting you, and that it would be good to just not be addicted to alcohol, and then to practice to get rid of your alcohol addiction. And you can do this. Now, I have never been an alcoholic in this life, so I cannot talk with a great deal of authority on this, but from what I understand, and I've known several people who have been in that situation, if you make the effort and spend some time cultivating a mindset that is different from the addicted mindset, then you can overcome the alcohol addiction. Now, whether that means that you are no longer in danger, or whether it means that you've just learned to live a productive life without alcohol and be happy that way, I don't want to comment on that. But the fact is, you can, after having been addicted to alcohol, live a life completely free from alcohol in every sense of the word, where you don't need it, you don't want it, you understand that it's a bad thing, and therefore you don't drink alcohol. Buddhism as a whole is very similar to this, except the Buddha looks at a lot more than just a simple alcohol addiction. He looks at how we are addicted or how we cling to all kinds of different pleasures, even how we cling to ideas, even how we cling to wanting to exist or wanting to not exist. All these forms of craving and clinging, habits and addiction, those patterns, that is really what the Buddhist path is about. Seeing them, understanding them, and letting go of them. And Nirvana is simply the end goal that you can reach once you have understood so much about the true nature of reality that you have let go of all attachments, of all addictions, even subtle ones that normal people wouldn't generally call an addiction, but they would use a word like attachment or partiality even. So once you can, for example, truly love everyone unconditionally, you will no longer be partial. You will no longer say, "Ooh, these people are my friends, I like them, but those people have hurt me, I don't like them as much." When you let go, when you truly let go and understand that hatred, aversion, ill will never make you happy, will never make you happy. Never mind the people that you might be hating, that all that hatred, ill will and anger might be directed toward. Don't even worry about those people. Those mind states, hatred, ill will, anger, jealousy, they are going to make you unhappy, always, as the one who is doing them, who is thinking that way. So the more you understand of that, and the more you can let go of unuseful and harmful mind states, the more free you will be, the greater your liberation will be. And Nirvana is simply the state that the Buddha did reach, and that several of his disciples did reach, and that you can still reach today by following the Buddhist path all the way, where you have let go of all greed, hatred, and delusion. You understand how the world works. You perfectly understand what to do with your mind in any given moment of existence so that you can always be happy and content. That is what Nirvana is. It's not a heaven where you finally get all the things that you've been craving. It's a state of mind that you reach by understanding where your craving comes from and where it leads, where you can actually and have actually let go of all craving. That does not mean that you cannot enjoy anything anymore. You will be happy and you will be content all the time, but it will not be the kind of happiness that is based on the things that you think you want when you're not there yet. So for example, you will be kind and loving toward everyone, but it will not be as it is probably now, at least for me it is, that's why I know this, where yes, I like to be kind to people, I like to help people, but I really enjoy it when they thank me for it, when they appreciate it, when they are grateful. That is what makes me happy. And if I do lots of things for someone and that person is just nasty in return and ungrateful and doesn't appreciate anything that I've done, that sort of makes me unhappy. This is not good. I realize that this is not good, that this is something that I should change about my own attitude. And this is something that I'm working on changing. And that is one of the reasons, it's actually for me personally the main reason, why I am on this path of Buddhism. Because I understand that the more I can let go of this mind state and similar mind states, the happier I become. And I've of course practiced Buddhism for several years now, for about 10 years actually. So I have let go of many of those forms of aversion, anger, hatred, and my life has become better because of it. So I know it's working, I can see it is working, and I just continue on this path. And of course I am also aware of the fact that I have not walked this path all the way to its end. I am just on the path. But the good thing about this path is it is good in the beginning, it is good in the middle, and it is good in the end. This is, by the way, a quote from the Buddha, word for word. So I don't have to worry about being relatively new to the path. I don't have to think about, oh, maybe I'm not even a beginner anymore, maybe I'm intermediate now, or maybe I'm even at an advanced level. I don't have to worry about any of this, because the path stays the same. The instructions for the most part stay the same. They actually do stay the same. It's just your own personal difficulties that you have to overcome one by one. But the totality of the path, the instruction set itself, does not change whether you're a beginner or a highly advanced practitioner. People who are all the way done, who are fully enlightened, they will still adhere to what we call the 5 precepts, the training rules. Not to kill living beings, for example. For us, it's a training rule. We remind ourselves not to kill a living being, and whenever we can make a choice that results in either killing a living being or not killing a living being, we make the choice, or we try to make the choice that does not lead to the death of that living being. For Arahants, they don't look at it as a training rule anymore. Arahants are fully enlightened beings, because their training is finished. They don't have to train anymore, but now that they're finished, they fully understand how reality works, and for that reason, they do not wish to kill any living beings, so they don't kill living beings either. So you don't really see a big difference externally. That is also why there are lots of people who think they have met, or they have, a fully enlightened teacher. That person might just be sufficiently well developed so that there are no outward signs, or no gross outward signs, of any problems such as anger or greed or delusion. It does not mean that they're necessarily fully enlightened. If someone says that he's fully enlightened, I'm thinking of a few people in particular, this could mean that that person is fully enlightened. There have been many men and women who became fully enlightened since the Buddha started teaching this, or since the Buddha did his teaching 2600 years ago. Back then, hundreds of people became enlightened. Even now there are reports of people who have become enlightened. So it could be the truth. Or it could be that the person is simply mistaken. This happens a lot also. It hasn't happened to me personally. I've never thought that I was fully enlightened. But if you practice a lot, and you suddenly become very calm and peaceful and quiet, and it seems like you're not angry at all, and it goes like that for weeks or even months, then you might think to yourself, wow, I'm probably fully enlightened, and after a while you might become convinced that you are fully enlightened. And then, of course, there are people that might just be lying, that really have no interest in practicing much, they have no interest in becoming enlightened, and they just say they're enlightened because maybe someone pays them to teach, or maybe someone gives them food, or maybe they just like hearing themselves talk. This could also happen. And I believe there are probably all those types of enlightened people in the world. But there are also lots of people who don't talk about enlightenment at all, and many of the truly enlightened people that we talk about are ones that never said of themselves that they are enlightened. So you have to just understand that people are in different places and they say different things, and what it's really about, always in Buddhism, is your own cultivation. You want to have a happier life by changing the way you operate, by changing the way you think, by changing how you live, by transforming your life. That's what the Buddhist method is about, and the end goal is actually the cessation, the ending of all suffering. But hand in hand with that, it's really the cessation of all perception and feeling. This is what the Buddha called the highest bliss. And once you start experiencing those things, you will understand the Buddha's teaching much better. So until that happens, I just want to say this one thing, because I know of at least one person who had a really hard time in his life with Buddhism, because he learned about Buddhism from books when he was very young, and he just had this preconceived notion. He just assumed that Nirvana obviously must be the highest heaven. And then later, as he found out that what the Buddha is actually talking about is not a type of heaven, but is really a mindset where you let go of all attachments, he never really got over that. So that's another thing that they don't tell you, not because they're malicious, but just because it's hard to explain in our cultural context. But I tried to do it anyway, since you asked the question. So those are the things that I think they don't tell you about Buddhism. Maybe another thing that some people might not tell you about Buddhism is that, yes, Buddhism is compatible with an inquisitive and scientific and rational and non-religious mindset. Buddhism is not really a religion, but there is a lot of stuff in Buddhism which, in a context like I am speaking right now, often gets left out so as to not alienate people, because, and I know this from personal experience, when I first realized that the Buddha was an incredibly brilliant, ingenious teacher, that he really understood and was able to explain the world better than anyone else I know of, and this is still true, when it then came to the point where the Buddha talked about rebirth, about beings dying and then being born again, and not just rebirth as another human being, not just even rebirth as animals, but he also talked about being born as a ghost, or being born in hell, or being born as an angel or a god. So when all these things started happening, when there were discourses where demons and serpents were listening to the Buddha, were interacting with the Buddha, a shape-shifting reptile, for example, actually became ordained as a monk at the time of the Buddha. And then while he was sleeping, he took the form of a big snake or serpent, which freaked the monk out, the monk that was sleeping next to him or trying to sleep next to him. So that's why the Buddha made a rule that in order to be a monk, you have to be a human being. When you get to those discourses or those teachings, coming from our Western mindset, where our main religion, other than Christianity, is usually what I like to call scientism, materialism, which has blind faith in the assertion that matter exists without observation, matter exists without consciousness, matter exists without mind, and consciousness, mind, and observation are all epiphenomena, are all just generated by matter. This is, in my opinion, an obviously incorrect view, but it is taken as the foundation for science nowadays a lot of the time, which then leads them to say, oh yeah, quantum mechanics is not quite right yet, but we don't really know how to fix it. We are hoping that a future generation will be able to fix it. So anyway, I'm starting to rant a little bit here. What I'm saying is, what a lot of people in the West don't tell you about Buddhism right away is that the Buddha is very clear that yes, there is a heaven, there is a hell, there are angels and gods and demons and serpents, and not just snakes that are regular animals, but yes, serpents that can shapeshift into human form, that kind of thing. You'll lose, and I'm probably losing a lot of my audience right now when you talk about this. So people don't generally talk about these things in the beginning. Eventually, if you actually read the discourses of the Buddha, you can't get around this fact. And I think there are lots of people who still take most of those supernatural things as metaphors. And that's fine, because what Buddhism is really about, the method of Buddhism, the practice that you have to implement in your own life to become happy, really has very, very little to do with things like gods and angels and demons and serpents. It actually has nothing to do with them. They just happen to be there because the Buddha had such a powerful aura, or just was such a powerful presence, that not only people were really attracted and wowed by him, but other beings that normally don't come to visit us, they came to see the Buddha and he went to see them. Now, if you believe that out of the billions and billions of star systems that we know of in this universe, there is only one, this one, where there is only one intelligent life form, people, then you have a right to that belief. But I believe it's not unreasonable to think that in the billions and billions of worlds out there, there might be other intelligent life forms that we might refer to as angels or gods. It doesn't necessarily mean that they have all the specific qualities that you might associate with an angel or a god or a demon, but I think it's just as likely as not that the universe is full of all those beings and that there is a way to communicate with them that most of us simply have not discovered. So, yeah, whether you want to take those as metaphors or not, it's really just an aside. The teaching of the Buddha, the method itself, remains the same, remains pretty much the same, regardless of whether there are gods or demons or serpents involved. It's always about very clear and obvious things that become very clear and obvious once you look into them yourself. That's what it's all about. You look at the teaching. If you feel that you can and want to, you practice it, and then you see what results you get, and you compare those results with the results that other people have gotten or that the Buddha says you're going to get, and then you see how it all makes sense. You see what makes sense and what might not make sense. If you live your whole life according to the Buddha's instructions, and all this time, throughout your entire practice, you never discover any signs of demons or angels or serpents or gods, and therefore you die believing that all those things probably or most likely do not exist, you will still have had a much better life practicing Buddhism than you would have had without it. Because Buddhism is not about gods or angels or demons or believing anything at all. Buddhism is about doing the things that you need to do to create a happy life for yourself and for everyone who comes in contact with you. Even for people who don't come in direct contact with you, even for other beings that don't come in direct contact with you. You probably know, if you have pets or if you've seen pets, that animals can be happy or unhappy. And the way you live your life can affect animals, can affect people. And if you believe in aliens, maybe it can affect aliens too. But that's not the point. The point is just simply generating happiness. Not worrying about whether you're generating happiness for just yourself or for others or for aliens or animals. So this was a little bit pointed and it's not that simple. I just want to make you aware of some things that they won't tell you in the beginning about Buddhism, but that are nonetheless there. So that's pretty much all I can think of that I would want to mention when someone asks what it is that they might be missing about Buddhism or that they might not be telling us about Buddhism. If you or anyone has any comments, any additions to this, anything at all, I always welcome comments, especially on a topic like this. So thanks for listening and have a good day.